Good morning, folks, and welcome to the Quaker Talks, which we have every Friday. We've had many and diverse talks, and this one I think fits into that bill. We have today our friend Eddy Knasel, whose talk is titled Quakers and Aging. Eddy.
I'll begin by sharing my screen. I'm not doing that very well. Sorry. I'll get there in the end.
No rush, don't worry.
Okay. Should open the presentation first, shouldn't we? Here we go. So, thank you very much for inviting me to talk. I've actually quite enjoyed and appreciated the whole business of putting this talk together. I've got two things to say before I actually start. One is you'll notice that the title I've put up is slightly different from what Ray just said, and that's because I've changed it slightly as we've gone on. It's now called A Quaker's View of Age and Ageism. A couple of other things I'd like to say. The other thing I wanted to say first really was, when I was very kindly invited originally to give this talk, I think it was Chris Wilmore would suggest I might give a talk about death and dying. And I felt, I was in the middle of moving house at the time, and I really felt that's not a topic I'm hugely expert in, and I wasn't prepared to go and do the research for it. I actually thought it would be more appropriate to get one of our funeral advisors to do that. But so instead I offered a topic that I felt I did know something about, which is age and ageism. Oh, just to let you know before I go any further, there is a point during the talk where I will be asking you to think about questions you might be asking, and then we'll have a short discussion at that point. Otherwise, could you leave your questions to the end? Because I find I've put quite a lot of work into preparing this, and it's quite hard to actually stop and start all the time. So I'll move on to my first slide. I'm assuming you can all see what's happening here, which is topics for this morning. I'm just going to very quickly, I hope, take you through the main things I'm going to be talking about. So to begin with, I'm going to be talking about where I'm coming from, and essentially why I feel able to talk about this topic. Then the second part, I'm going to be talking about Quaker views on aging, a few things I've looked up in found in advices and queries and in faith and practice. And then the second main part of the talk, I'm going to be talking about a few facts about aging. They're all pretty much joined by, gathered from work that's been done by two organisations, Age UK and the Centre for Aging Better. And I'll say a bit more about this organisation as we go on. And then the final topic, we'll be talking about avoiding ageism, which is something that I hope friends will be able to take away with them and apply to their own work in pastoral care with everybody in their meeting and so on. So that's basically the structure of what I'm going to talk about. So where am I coming from? Why did I think I could have something to say about that? Well, for a start, I'm 70 years old myself, so I can talk from lived experience. On top of that, I've mentioned before we got started, my daughter Bianca, who is now, she started coming to Quakers when she was 8, and she's now 37, and she's employed by the Centre for Aging Better. Now, the Centre for Aging Better is a charitable organisation whose base is in London, but she's actually been seconded for a couple of years to Greater Manchester Council, the Greater Manchester Authority, where she's responsible for the age-friendly policy and the development and implementation of the age-friendly policy. And before that, she was actually age-friendly officer for Bristol Age UK. So I've really heavily on some resources that she shared with me and what I'm going to be talking about, certainly in the second part of this talk. And she's incredibly helpful in doing this sort of stuff. And because when she worked in Bristol, she was responsible for something called the Bristol Aging Better project. Both my wife and I got volunteered in that. Anna ran made a regular radio program on Radio Ujima that was called The Babbers Show, making it local using a bit of Bristolese there, that was intended to give a more positive view of older people, and went out of its way to combat stereotypes, which is something I'll be talking about as we move on. I was involved in evaluating the Bristol Aging Better project as a volunteer member of a team that the UE put together. And I'll talk a little bit about that vaguely as we go on. Partly through my involvement with that, but also through my involvement as your rep on Churches Together in Greater Bristol, I came to be involved in setting up Horfield's Dementia Aware Cafe, which was called Horfield Friends Cafe. And I learned a lot of lessons through that, and I will be sharing some of the lessons I learned. That was funded by something what was then called the Quaker Mental Health Fund, and I will certainly be talking about some things that I learned through them. So I'm going to go on now and talk about, offer you some comments on Quakers on Aging. And here are a couple of quotes from advices that I found in advices and queries. Number 29, approach older age with courage and hope. As far as possible, make arrangements for your care in good time so that an undue burden does not fall on others. Although old age may bring increasing disability and loneliness, it can also bring serenity, detachment, and wisdom. Pray that in your final years, you may be enabled to find new ways of receiving and reflecting God's love. I found that quote particularly helpful in the last 2 or 3 years. In particular, it's partly influenced my enthusiasm for moving to a smaller house recently. And then I think this next one is not specifically about older people, but it's about something, it's an advice that's about how we should. Hello, Hattie, by the way. I live just down the road from you, I think. I think this is something we should bear in mind in terms of everybody, but it does apply to the fact that we need to be aware of the needs of older people in everything we do. How can we make the meeting a community in which each person is accepted and nurtured and strangers are welcomed? Seek to know one another in the things that are eternal and bear the burden of each other's failings and pray for one another. But of course, in everything we do, friends, we need to be guided by this, probably the key quote that in everything George Fox ever said, and certainly the basis of my take on Quakerism. There is God, that of God in everyone. So I'm going to present you now for a couple of 4 quotes from Faith and Practice. The first 2 are quite contrasting quotes, I think. I'm going to read you now something that Hannah Whittle Smith wrote in 1903. I'm convinced it is a great art to know how to grow old gracefully, and I am determined to practice it. I always thought I should love to grow old, and I find it even more delightful than I thought. It is so delicious to be done with things and to feel no need any longer to concern myself much about earthly affairs. I am tremendously content to let one activity after another go and to wait quietly and happily the opening of the door at the end of the passageway. That will let me into my real abiding place. Sometimes I do feel a bit like Hannah on that, but more often I'm afraid I feel a bit like this much more poetic take on it by Catherine Moore. Who is this old woman that I live with now? All my previous lives I've lived with myself. Not always comfortably, I admit. Still, we get along. You see, we share the same habits, myself and I. For instance, we both thought and moved fast. This stranger uses a stick, creeps along, drops things, can't pick them up, slow at picking up a point too. I lose my patience with her. Myself and I would work, play and sleep at nights after crammed days. She sits and sits. Kind people say, I'll come and see you soon, dear. Isn't she wonderful, they say. I don't think so. Sometimes I think, well, you know what I mean. Others think so too, otherwise they wouldn't be so kind to the dear old thing. The worst of it is, it seems I'm stuck with her. God knows how I'll manage, but as he knows, perhaps we'll see to it. And I do quite, as someone who suffered from a brain hemorrhage a few years ago, I do quite often feel like that, particularly in terms of the stick. I can get away with it when I'm sat down like this, but if you saw me walking along, you'd know why I feel like that. So those are two views. I've got a couple other quotes that I found in this. There's a section in Faith and Practice 21 that's headed Living a Full Life, and I found a few quotes in that. And here's one from a member of the Sturge family, 2145. We must be confident that there is still more life to be lived and yet more heights to be scaled. The tragedy of middle age is that so often men and women cease to press towards the goal of their high calling. They cease learning, cease growing. They give up life and resign from life. As wisdom dawns with age, we begin to measure our experiences not by what life gives to us, not by the things withheld from us, but by the power to help us grow in spiritual wisdom. And another passage from the Big Red Book, 2146, and this is from London Yearly Meeting 1923. Those of you who are kept by age or sickness for more active work, who are living retired lives, may in your very separation have the opportunity of liberating powers for others. Your prayers and thoughts go up further than you think, and as you wait in patience and communing with God, you may be made ministers of peace and healing and be kept young in soul. So I think, friends, I think there's a danger that because we probably say a bit more about old age than most other denominations, we actually feel we've got it maybe a bit cracked. But I have to tell you, friends, that one of the results of my being involved in the Horfield Friends Cafe, which was funded by the Quaker Mental Health Fund, as a result of that, I got invited to become involved in something called Quaker Voices for Mental Health. And one of the activities we had was to set up a number of special topic groups. I decided to set up a topic group based on my experience of running the cafe that was about dementia awareness. It was the most popular group. More people joined that than anything else. And I think the fact that it was more popular suggested there was a clarity amongst friends that we are not very good at caring for people with dementia, or more generally, we fail a bit when we're dealing with older people in general. This particular comment, which really struck me very strongly, is apparently absolutely true, and it's not unique. I've heard a number of other meetings where something very similar has been said. An elder took aside a friend who was caring for her elderly relative, saying, "She gives the same ministry every week. Could you stop bringing her, please? Because it's not fair on everybody else." Personally, I think that's a rubbish way of dealing with the situation, and I think we need to learn better. So what I'm urging you to do in this talk today is to learn a little bit about the prejudice called ageism and how we can avoid it. So most of what I'm going to be taking is, as I've said earlier, taken from work that's been done by the Centre for Aging Better, and a great deal of it comes from a publication they brought out back in 2021 called Challenging Ageism. As we go through, we'll get a clearer idea about what I mean by ageism and so on. It's a very useful little booklet, and really what I'm going to be saying now is a potted version of what it has to say. So I'm going to run through now what the Centre for Aging Better have identified on statistical analysis as being 10 facts about ageism. And at the end of it, I'm going to ask you which of these facts might have surprised you, and perhaps we can have a little discussion about that. So I've numbered them. Fact number 1, in less than 20 years, 1 in 4 people will be over 65. Number 2, while on average older people have higher levels of wealth than younger groups, huge financial inequality exists among people in later life. Some 1.9 million people aged 65 and over live in relative poverty, and amongst those those people, 1.1 million, are in what's classified as severe poverty. Most of our later lives are spent independently. In fact, 90% over 65s live in mainstream ordinary housing, not care homes or retirement communities. 4, in the workplace, over a third of workers aged over 50. Many people over 50 provide unpaid care for loved ones, and in retirement, many people volunteer and help out in their communities. 5, older people are the backbone of Britain's public services. 3.4 million key workers are over 50, and 130,000 of those are over 70. 6, regular volunteering, particularly informal, is more common at older age groups. Both formal and informal volunteering peak in the 65 to 74-year age group. 7, life satisfaction is at its highest in later life, and people aged 70 and over are more positive about aging than any other age group. By contrast, number 8, people in younger age groups, 16 to 24, are 3 times more likely to experience loneliness than people aged over 65. That's the feeling of loneliness rather than actually being isolated. 9, contrary to media representations of intergenerational conflict, 80% of people believe older adults have a wealth of experience and perspectives to offer society today. 10, despite many adverts featuring over 40s, over 50s account for more than half of all consumer spending. They are the top spenders in a number of categories, such as travel and tourism, food, clothing, household goods, and eating out. So, friends, which, if any, of those facts surprised you? Go ahead.
I think 10, oh, sorry.
Shall I speak?
I think Hattie had her hand up.
Yeah, shall I say something?
Please, yeah.
Number 2 was about poverty.
Yeah.
And it says 1.9 million people aged 65 live in relative poverty. I think it's probably more than 1.9 million in this country. But
these are actually UK statistics that they've analysed.
Oh, they are stats. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Right. Well, that's surprised me because I thought it was possibly more then.
Yeah.
And then the other one was about working in public services.
Yeah, that's at the bottom there. Yeah.
And again, key workers it's talking about.
Yes.
Okay, it's key workers.
Yeah.
Maybe that doesn't surprise me. Okay.
Eddy, can you show number 9, please?
Of course, yeah.
No, it's number 8.
Yeah, there you go.
That one surprised me.
I'll go back, sorry. Yeah. It surprised me as well, actually. It came as quite a shock because so much of my involvement in the Bristol Aging Better project was about the amount of about how older people suffer from loneliness. And one of the key things we found about that was there's this perception that that people living in care homes don't suffer from loneliness. And what we found was they certainly do. So it did surprise me, but it says something about the 16 to 24 generation, he says, generalizing wildly. I think it's a shocking statistic, quite frankly.
It's very sad.
Yes.
And suicide levels.
Exactly. Yeah.
Number 7 surprised me too.
Yes. I'm going to talk a bit later about how older people themselves are by no means immune to ageism. It surprised me as well. I used to do Thought for the Day on Radio Bristol, and many of the talks I gave were actually about people encouraging people to recognise the whole concept of wisdom in older people. It seems I probably didn't need to do that if people if 80% of people, 0.9, 80% of people believe that older adults have a wealth of experience and perspectives to offer society today. That was often the message I was trying to get across. Perhaps I simply didn't need to do it. Anyway, I'll move on now, if that's okay.
But before you move on, Eddie, can
Yeah.
I say a tiny thing about that? Is I worked with young people and young adults type of thing, and one lad would have been encouraged by his parents to get his own flat to and all this type of stuff, you know. But unfortunately, after he got all these types of things, his money did not accumulate to being able to have any kind of relationship with other people because he didn't have the money to go out and be with his mates type of thing, you know. And his loneliness was the fact that, yes, he had this, but society said you should do this. And he was encouraged by wiser heads to actually stop doing that and move in with other friends.
Right.
And so they were society norms sometimes. Anyway, do carry on, my friend.
Sure, it's a good point, actually, Ray. I remember the loneliest I've ever felt in my life was my first 2 weeks at university. I didn't know anybody, and it was very hard for me. And I missed all my friends and unfriends at school, that sort of thing. So maybe I shouldn't be so surprised about it. So I've used the word ageism quite a lot, and we're going to go on and explore that now. And I've not used a definition about it. In that booklet that I mentioned from the Centre for Aging Better, they pick out three key themes in it, which are reducing older people to negative stereotypes, pitting younger and older generations against each other, and portraying later life as a time of frailty and decline. And they also talk about the harm that ageism can do. Ageist attitudes have worrying consequences for physical and mental health. For example, older people are more likely to prescribe antidepressants than talking therapies. Faced with overwhelming negative attitudes about aging in day-to-day life, it's unsurprising older people themselves start applying ageist attitudes to other older people and indeed to themselves. I can't be the only person who knows older people who are in completely denial about their age. I've met I can think of 2 or 3 men who I know quite well who absolutely say, I'm not like that. I've got a relative who forever is talking about how remarkable he is because he still plays football, and hey, I scored a goal last week. I think that's one of the things about ageism is that in many ways it's a kind of prejudice against yourself when you get older, and I think those attitudes do carry through. So one of the keys to avoiding fostering ageism provided by the booklet is the need to mind your language, and it has these things to say about this. The way people currently talk about aging and older age is largely negative. To change this conversation, we need to stop reinforcing these beliefs and tell a new story. Small changes to the ways we speak and write about aging and older age, if applied consistently, could have a big impact. And in talking about age, the way we talk about age influences the way we feel about the aging process and the way we act towards people in different age groups. One of the biggest obstacles we face when it comes to embracing later life is the negative way we think and talk about it. So they go on to give 6 principles of age-friendly communication. In terms of the use of language, one of the things that's always struck me, that I've always been most impressed about Quakers, is the fact that we're pretty much ahead of the curve in the use of, have always been pretty much ahead of the curve in terms of using inclusive language. But I think there are things we can learn in terms of how we talk about older people. So I'm going to go through these 6 principles, which are: number 1, break the associations between older age with frailty, vulnerability, and dependency. All these things involve some do's and don'ts. So do embrace realistic depictions of aging. People don't have to look young for their age or run marathons to enjoy later life. And it's something my daughter's always been very clear about in the images she uses in the things she produces. Don't just show pictures of people skydiving and so on. And do give older people a voice. Personal stories and experiences can highlight the diversity of people in later life. And now there's a slightly longer list of don'ts. Don't just focus on images of later life as a time of frailty, or assume a life stage means a person has particular likes or interests, such as knitting. Nothing wrong with knitting as an interest, of course. And don't reinforce ideas of successful aging being down to an individual's personal actions. How we age is often more a product of our environments than personal choices, which in a sense tells me something about the importance of how meetings need to get these things right. And use preferred terminology. So do say older adults rather than older people, people, or old age pensioners. And do say people in later life rather than the elderly. And don't make jokes using cliches and phrases like dinosaur, over the hill, teaching old dogs new tricks, or teaching grandma to suck eggs. Don't refer to someone as grandfather or grandmother if they don't happen to be your grandmother or grandfather. And don't call people in care homes patients. They're not patients. They're people who are living in care homes are residents. They are living in their home, even though there's extra help and assistance when it's needed. And I think this is a really important thing. Avoid othering and what the Centre for Aging Better are calling compassionate ageism. I think compassionate ageism is a really interesting topic, and I think there's a danger that we friends may fall into it sometimes. Avoid using terms and language that evokes undue pity and makes older people sound like another group that's separate from the rest of society. Do always refer to people by their names. Don't describe older people as they or them. That's just giving way to generalization. Don't fall into compassionate ageism, a well-intentioned but paternalistic mindset where older people are portrayed as vulnerable and requiring protection. And we said this a bit before earlier in the talk. Don't use terms like dear, young at heart, little old lady, or grandmotherly. And don't use offensive terms such as baby boomer, grumpy old man or woman, geriatric or senile. And avoiding othering and compassionate ageism, don't state someone's age unless it's relevant. However, if you must state someone's age, be specific to avoid generalization. So say 76, not just they're in their well into their 70s. And don't use sensationalized language, both negatively, such as vulnerable, desperate, and terrified, and positively, such as beloved and smiling. And a really key point in my mind, don't stoke conflict between generations, and avoid metaphors which present old ages in terms of crisis. And here are some of the phrases they suggest avoiding: societal burden, grey silver tsunami, demographic cliff, demographic time bomb. And going back to that point about older people living in poverty, don't mistake age for wealth. Millions of older people are living in poverty or on low incomes. Generalizing about the wealth of older generations is misleading and creates an inaccurate sense of competition for resources between generations. So those are the main points I wanted to make. There's one other key suggestion in this booklet, which is relevant if you ever find yourself producing materials that use pictures. And think carefully about imaging. Keep your images of older people positive but realistic. And it's that point about skydive, always using pictures of older people doing a skydive on their 90th birthday, that sort of thing. The Centre for Aging Better does have a good free image library of people. Sorry, Marianne?
No, sorry, I better put myself on mute.
They do have a free image library, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, where they have collected some images that they claim are positive. And don't use close-ups of wrinkly hands clasped together. The widespread use of this kind of imagery is lazy and dehumanizing. Finally, I'm finishing now. I'm going to mention a few resources that you might find useful if you want to try and share some of these messages with other friends in your meeting and so on. And I would urge you to do that. Remember, friends, pastoral care is not just the responsibility of people nominated by area meeting. It's the responsibility in everybody in the meeting. There are a few copies. Challenging Ageism is actually out of print at the moment, but Bianca's got a few copies. If anybody wanted one, I could get hold of one for you. One of the useful resources that still exists is they produced an Age Without Limits quiz that takes the 10 key points facts that I talked about earlier. It's based on those, and I'm very happy to send out this presentation, and I will send that out with the presentation, that quiz with the presentation, if you like. And when I'm sending you, will of course include the link to the image library, which I do recommend. It's been through quite a big overhaul recently, and it is, if you do find yourself producing any resources involving older people, it's a very useful source of resources. So, friends, over to you. I'll stop the share now, and hopefully you can ask me any questions you like. Marianne, go ahead.
You're muted, Marion.
You're muted, Marianne.
I thought I'd unmuted myself. Has any thought been given to the interaction of sexism with ageism?
It doesn't talk about that, but I'm sure there's connections between the two.
Because I mean, certainly I've been in situations where I feel I've been that there are some places where older men are regarded as wise and older women are regarded as past it.
Yeah.
Regarded as what, Marianne?
Past it, over the hill, not worth considering. Yeah, I can't name exactly the situation, but usually in certainly in some of the kind of media things, and certainly and sometimes in professional settings.
And it's interesting that, isn't it? Because I'm not a woman myself, so I can't actually experience that. But there is it's an ancient concept of the wise old woman, isn't there?
Yeah, and so sometimes that happens as well. But there are situations where I just feel extremely irritated. It's not like you can kind of name it and say, oh, you shouldn't say that. It's like people just passing on to the next person on the panel, or things like that, just sort of quietly ignoring you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll let Bianca know that you said that, Marion. I've got to say, one of the things that I've said this many times, when I first went to Horfield meeting, it was an open day that Horfield held for anybody who was interested. I don't think we've ever done it since, maybe because one of the consequences they got was they got me. But one of the things that really struck me was the number of the formidable and really admirable older women that I met there, who I really admired, and I wished I could be somebody like that.
So I don't think I've experienced that kind of dismissal in Quaker settings. It would be a bit ironic if it was, because
it would.
There's so many of us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's true. And of course, I mean, one of the things I remember a Churches Together in Bristol meeting I went to, where a fairly new member of the group from a denomination I'm not going to name said we were the first to have women pastors, except perhaps the Quakers. And I pointed out, since we don't have priests, I don't think we can comment on that. But, yeah. So But the reality is, you look at our early founding parents, there were almost as many women as there were men. And I think Margaret Fell was almost as important as George Fox, actually. It was so important that she was involved, you know. Mary, go ahead.
Sorry, Mary, do go.
I may be a bit vague about what I'm going to say, but it's true that as you get older, and I'm 90 in a few days' time, we are frailer and vulnerable and more dependent. And also, who uses this great wisdom we're meant to have?
Yes, it is true that we get frailer, and if you see me walking about, you'll see what frailty can be, whatever. Hattie, because you live on Priory Avenue, don't you? And the other week in Horfield, we every other week we hold a meeting for worship in Druid Stoke, a care home for an elderly Horfield friend who's living there. And one week I went to that, and then later in the day I actually went into West Brown Trim, and I couldn't tell the difference. It was like being in a care home there. There's one of the things that I really like about going and having coffee down in the village is the fact that I'm by no means the only person walking with a stick. You know, I mean, it is true that, but it's that business of, because somebody's old, we assume they're frail. You know. I had my 70th birthday fairly recently, and I said so to a friend of mine I've met through the gym I go to. It's my 70th birthday shortly. Do you want to come along? And he said, "Well, you don't act it."
No, you are it.
Yes.
You have to develop these quips, don't you?
You do.
Buffett.
Yeah, well, I thought it was a compliment, and I thanked him. I mean, and in fact, I was at my stroke survivor gym yesterday, and it was somebody's 76th birthday, and I said to him, "Well done, you know, congratulations on getting that far," that sort of thing. And you know, it's not the case that we're all frail, and if you take the actual official EU I think the EU definition of being older is 50 plus and so on. And in fact, when I showed this talk to my daughter Bianca, she had a lot of recommendations about putting in stuff about people who were still in employment, because there really is ageism in the labour market.
UK.
I quite definitely found that myself when I was looking to find a sort of small job to keep going, as it were. I was too old. People really didn't want to know about somebody my age. And in fact, when Anna was running the Babbers show, she had me on. We never let on about our family, about our relationship at all. And in fact, she used to interview Bianca, and Bianca blew the guff at one point when she sort of said, "So who are your sheroes then?" Because they were talking about the concept of shero, which is female heroes essentially. And
Okay.
Bianca said, "Well, you're one of my sheroes, Mum." and in fact, Anna interviewed me on the Babbers show and said, "Eddie, I understand you've been having difficulty finding a job," which she knew perfectly well I had. But yes, anyway. So I'm sorry. Where are we with this? Go ahead. I think it's probably Ray's turn now.
No, just a very small thing on aging in that sense. My brother, when he retired when he was supposed to retire at 65, a couple of friends said, "So what are you going to do now when you're retired?" And he looked at me rather quizzically and said, "Why should I retire? I'm doing the job I enjoy now, and I will continue to do it as long as I continue to enjoy it." He's now 72 and he's still working.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I was a GP and I had a patient, and she came to me when she was in her 80s, I think. And she said, my friends are all telling me to retire. I said, well, what do you do? And she says, well, I run my shop, I go up to London, the fashion shows, I choose the designs, I sell, I dress people. I love it. I said, so good. Why are they saying retire? That was one story. But the other story is in Japan, because they don't have social services like we have. And I don't know if you've been watching TV recently, but there's been a couple of programs featuring Japan. On Wednesday night, it was Race Across the World. And luckily, a couple of the people went and worked in a fish cafe restaurant, and they were able to talk and watch talk with and watch the older women who free dive down for mussels and shellfish, and they just work and they love it, and they said they loved it because they can speak freely with each other now.
Yes.
So that's another point. I think it's the societal attitude. I really, really do.
Yeah.
I love the idea of the age without limits quiz. That's brilliant. Age without limits. Love that.
It's I think it's one of the themes of what Centre Aging Better are doing nowadays. Actually, they did have a small little they put up some posters in a few cities recently, and Bianca was saying there was one in Bristol, actually not far from where we are, Hattie, and it was only up for a little bit, and it was it was essentially about are you ageist and stuff, and I don't know that had much impact, to be honest, but they do a lot of good stuff, and
well, I'll give an example from this morning. I said that I was, I needed to come home for 11 o'clock to this talk, and I was down at Westbury-on-Trim in the market, which is a fantastic market, but it's just between 10 and 11:30 or 12 or something like that. Anyhow, I went for a change and said I was coming up to this talk about aging. I said, oh, two people said, oh, and I said, no, it's really great. And they said, well, what's great? And I said, well, we're wiser, we're more sensible. We can speak our minds. We don't have a job to lose in our 20s and 30s anymore. Come on. But very many people say to me, you don't look 70, etc. I said, oh, well, never smoked, never had kids. So it does make a difference. Enough of me.
Yeah, Marion, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one sort of area of life that I feel where sort of is a problem where I feel old and out of touch is electronic media, and I'm just not very good at it, and every time I think I actually finally understood. Things have moved on, and there's another bunch of stuff that I don't understand. And so much of my life is spent just trying to keep the ordinary wheels going. I think I've got complaints now to about 4 different organisations about things that aren't going right. And that makes me feel old, because I just can't do these things. And I think there's a society-wide, and it doesn't only apply to old people, but it does apply more. And I think there's systematic discrimination against people who can't manage the new electronic world. All sorts of things are made more difficult, are not available, can't be done, are no longer in existence, etc. And that bothers me a lot. I kind of find I have sort of more frequent feelings that I can't cope with my life anymore. And I think losing that sort of sense of independence, body not being quite so reliable, and forgetting loads of things, but all those things are just about coping with, but not not being able to kind of manage the digital world is a kind of source of kind of constant, I'm going to say almost despair, really.
Bianca was on BBC television breakfast show a few months back. They did a whole sort of section about the way that car parks are requiring people to have mobile phones to pay anything now. And they contacted the BBC, bless them, contacted the Centre for Ageing Better, asking if they could have someone to come and be interviewed about it. And they said, well, your show's in Manchester. We happen to have a member of staff is in Manchester. And so she was on it. And they're making those points that there's an assumption nowadays that everybody uses IT. And it's actually, and it's not just age. I mean, it is the case that I think younger people grown up with it and are much more used to it and whatever. But it's not just older people who don't use IT. I mean, the way that banks are moving increasingly towards not having branches and you do everything on the internet nowadays is seriously disenfranchising. And it's got to be stopped, frankly.
Thank you, Marion, for expressing your discomfort so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it can be stopped. I do think that we need to think about alternatives and hows. So, for instance, the post offices have been disappearing from countryside villages and towns for years and years. How have they dealt with it? You know, by having a person in a little venue who comes and does the things at set times per week. So there are different ways of trying to cope with it, but somehow that's what I think. I mean, plenty of my friends have the simple kind of mobile phone that can't do links, can't receive a text more than about 30 words, and you know, can't do voicemail, can't this, that, and the other. And why shouldn't they have those phones? It's their form of communication. And you may not know that since 2016, I think it is, the AIS has been law. That is the Accessible Information Standard on your health records and other organizations dealing with you. It should say how to access you. And I constantly ask them, I said, so have you got it on your records that I'm hard of hearing? No, madam, we haven't. I said, please put it on there. I'll wait whilst you do it. Because it's impossible to educate people except one by one.
Portishead has 30,000 residents and no post office.
Has it got any banks?
It's got 2 left.
I mean, that's good, really, isn't it?
I mean, tell me how do you get post office services in Portishead?
You have to go 6 miles to Clevedon or Pill. You have to get on a bus or take the car.
And if you're not mobile and don't have the money to pay for all this, anyway, right now stop talking.
I don't know.
I mean, I think this a kind of general trend of whole swathes of people who simply don't count anymore. And I think that's when you get a sort of not just a generational divide, but a kind of, you know, an inequality divide. You know, if you are poor, if you have the slightest disability, then getting the occasional bus from Portishead to is it Pill or what's it called? Clevedon. It's really not on. You know, whatever, you know, I don't know what one can do about it. I mean, when I stay with a friend in Austria, She pays everything by cash. She says, cash is our last freedom. She said, cash means the people I'm paying actually get the money. Doesn't have stuff siphoned off. And I know what I'm actually doing, and I'm accountable for it. And there isn't somebody else keeping a record of it in some back room, as there is with electronic transactions.
And when I pay by cash, which I try to do, I talk about it with the person I'm paying.
On a rather positive thing, friends, we of our age, and I say looking round to the people here, you know, we were all born around the 1950s, some more, some less than that. And this kind of nearly, and I'm going to use perhaps a crass word, baby boomers, have been going through the cohort in those times. And we are one of the first of the generation who are old people who are demanding things more than accepting things like my parents and my grandparents did. Oh, well, we're old, so we're bloody blah. But no, the group that I and many of us here are in are the first of the old people who say, listen, I want, or this should be happening. In that sense, it is better than if you remember back to what your parents and your grandparents were like in that sense. Yeah. This is the start of the kind of nearly don't treat me in that fashion type of thing. And I think we should rejoice in that.
Yeah.
We've also got education. I mean, my parents had to leave school, one of them at the age of 10 and the other at the age of 14 for a variety of reasons. They certainly didn't have the option of studying further until they were older, and they were able to go to night classes, and they pursued their education in that way. But I think education makes such a difference. It gives us confidence to open our mouths and say, no, that's not fair. I think that's really been a great thing.
Yeah. I think it was a discussion group I went to for the first time this week, and we were reflecting on how the 60s was a very positive period. Was when higher education got expanded massively, and there was a kind of Goldilocks period in the 60s and 70s where the world really had got better, and I think for most people, and I think whether the world is really better now than it was, I don't know, but I think we are sounding like quite an older group now, folks. I always swore that when I was older, I wouldn't sit around talking about the good old days and complaining about operations and stuff. I am a frequent visitor at the NHS at the moment.
David's trying to say something.
Yeah, thank you. Well, this is lovely, and I as a kid growing up, I lived through this technical revolution, and I appreciate that some people find it quite hard to deal with, but change has been a constant for humanity. Circumstances are always changing, and we're in such a major shift at the moment. We're at the end of the age of capitalism. Capitalism is failing quite badly, but what's coming in, I was been trying to think of a title for a talk that I'll give soon, and I've got a title that's too long because it's polarized, and it's, on the one hand, we have a duty to decarbonize, which people are seeing as a crisis and a problem and all the rest of it. And on the other hand, we have an opportunity to electrify, which is to create a pollution-free society running with a very efficient economy in which everybody could very easily have enough. We're certainly not at that stage right now, and that's, tough for people who may not live through into that time, myself included. But it's to me, it's a really optimistic time, and it's an opportunity to, the project I'm working on is about making community centres more resilient and with better local economies because of the dividend of shifting to cheap local renewable energy. So I just wanted to put that in as a counterpoint that it's such an age of change, and this is an opportunity actually to rejoice and help bring in something better.
I love your idea that capitalism is at an end, but I'd love to know more about that.
Well,
at some point.
Drop in a few weeks' time. We'll be talking about it.
Yeah, because at the moment it seems like it's a bit rampant.
Yes.
Yeah, the negative is much more visible than the positive, but that's like in spring. If you go out, you can see all the dead branches and everything, or you can see little things popping up in the ground. And if you know that those are bulbs pushing through, it's actually a really good time.
I think Hattie just pointed out to me that Gordon wants to speak.
Well, thank you. I found this very provocative and most interesting. There's some things that I feel different about, though. I think very little mention has been through the actual process of passing through the gate into the next world. And that has a great effect on both ourselves and other people. And I think, too, we perhaps should look at it, separate how we regard old age ourselves and how we see it in others. I remember when I was teaching in my teens, teaching teenagers, somebody pointed out to me that the children I was working with, any one of them could be dead tomorrow, and that you had to treat them as though every day mattered. It didn't matter what age you were. And I know that's very difficult to apply right across the ages. There's one little verse, I hope you don't mind running into time, but there's a little verse I have loved for a long time. If you don't mind, I'll read it. The soul's dark cottage, battered and decayed, lets in new light through chinks that time has made. Stronger by weakness, wiser men become as they draw near to their eternal home. Leaving the old, both worlds they now can view, who stand upon the threshold of the new. And I feel it's an attitude. Just regard everybody as the last day and everybody else. And it's very difficult when you're meeting people who do need help because of their age. But it really doesn't matter. This is the time of life when, you really wonder about the meaning of life. What was your purpose? Never mind what you're born into or whatever. What is to make it with your life? Sorry, I hope that doesn't go too far.
Lovely.
That, I think, is more like the talk I was invited to give about death and dying. Yeah. And I think it would be a good idea to get a funeral advisor to maybe talk about that. And about their work. I remember there's a good friend of mine who I used to work with, who when we were working together, neither of us was involved in any form of organised religion. He's now the vicar of North Wembley. And he regards being with people as they're dying as an intrinsic part of his work. I'm not clear that Quakers do that. And
There is that lovely new choir that some people belong to, called, I can't remember what it's called, where they sing around people's bedsides.
Ah, I like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I might actually have to make some sort of clear living will stating I don't want that. But
you could perhaps name a hymn that you might particularly like, perhaps.
oh yeah, I mean I wasn't thinking of hymns, but I did tell my family years back what I wanted played at my funeral.
Hmm.
And they wondered why. And then I went into hospital, and I might have died. And then, perhaps they thought, maybe they realised why I'd said that. But I mean, I don't know. But it's quite a nice game to play, actually. What would you like played at this event you won't be at? I mean,
Yes. Hmm. Yes, I much prefer the idea of the hymns being sung, hymns of my choice being sung around my bed while I was still in this world.
yeah. I did go to. My daughter didn't drag. I went very willingly. I went to Greenbelt, not last year, but the year before, and for the first time in my life, I took Holy Communion because we were having a big sort of communion thing that was actually in fact focused around saving the planet, where we all sort of sat around just in circles, and we were provided with a drink and some bread and whatever. And we were at one point in what I would say is a highly programmed meeting. We were asked to reflect about where what life would be like for us in 30 years' time. And I said and we had to say that to the person we sat next to. And I said to the person, well, it won't affect me because I won't be alive. I'll be dead. And she was shocked. And I think I realized I was talking to a different kind of Christian from myself who believed in the afterlife. And it was a really good experience for me because I felt I'd found my people, in the sense of actually finding liberal Christians whose views, with whom I had far more in common than I expected I would do. And I'd gone through the whole thing thinking I might be one of 2 or 3 Quakers that were there. When there was a Quaker meeting on the Sunday, and the tent was absolutely packed. And one the thing I found in all of my interchurch work is the extent to which we are really actually cherished by the denominations, who actually think you're the people who've got it right. No, I think we're the people who've got it right because we're the people who know we're wrong. And I'm serious about that. I think,
Yeah.
actually the important thing is to understand, think it possible that you may be mistaken. I think is one of the more important statements in advices and queries. I remember saying I am still officially actually the Quaker representative at UWE, and I actually went on a residential chaplaincy training course. And at the end of it, I got on really well with all the people. It was apparently the first time that they'd run it when the majority of people weren't Church of England. And we all got on really well, even the Catholics. And I said at the end of it, the important thing to bear in mind is that you're all wrong. We all are. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
How long do you want to go on, friends?
This is usually a what I would say is a moving feast. We usually stop when there hasn't been questions and people. One can usually gauge that people would like to leave now.
I need to leave, so I don't mind how long you go on for.
They were and I think personally, friends, we have got to that place where it has come to a natural break. And so I would say, thank you very much, Eddy. It has been provocative and interesting,
Yeah.
and we have all enjoyed the time we have spent together here.
Thank you. I have to
Yeah,
admit,
thanks,
I said at
Eddy,
the beginning,
yes.
I found the
Thank
business
you.
and the talk useful and helpful. It's always useful to have to do a presentation because you get your own thoughts all get more organised. Sorry, Hattie, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask Gordon to give us the name of who wrote that poem because it's quite powerful.
It is.
Well, my memory, you asked, doesn't work like that.
Oh, that poem.
Oh,
Yeah.
you had it from your
But
memory.
it's a minor poet. I think his name was Waller, Waller, and he was writing in the middle of the 1600s.
Ah,
Waller.
And so it's the first sentence is the soul.
The soul's dark cottage, which I really love the phrase. The soul's dark cottage, battered and decayed, lets in new light through chinks that time has made. Wisdom, in other words, yeah.
So
Right.
I'm sure that one could find it
Oh, yeah.
on the
Well,
internet. Thank
I'll
you.
look it up if you need to. Give me a call. Thank you.
The person who has just spoken to us is the lovely Hattie, who is speaking for next week to us.
all right.
And Discovering Cuba, Part 2. If you haven't seen Part 1, it's recorded upon the internet, I think, David, is it not?
They usually are.
Thank you very much. And with that, may you have a lovely day, and we'll see you again next Friday. Thank you,
Lovely.
friends.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you, Eddy.
And it was The Soul's Dark Cottage by Edward Waller, and I'll put the text in the under the video.
Oh, I got that.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you.